Hi, welcome to our daily encounter. Have you ever really wanted something from the Lord? You wanted your prayers answered very badly. So much so that deep in your heart you felt, you know what, I would do anything if the Lord would answer this prayer. Maybe it had to do with the health of a loved one. Maybe it had something to do with the spiritual condition of a loved one. It could be a lot of different things, but there's just things that from the depths of your heart you wanted God to answer the prayer. Well, if so, and I'm sure we all have experienced that, you can probably relate to our main character in our reading today, Jephthah. Jephthah really wanted something. He wanted the sons of Ammon to be delivered into his hand. And he wanted it so desperately and so badly that he made a vow that he would later regret. He made the vow, Lord, if you will deliver them into my hands, I will offer up on a sacrifice the first thing that comes out of my house. Well, the Lord keeps his end of the deal, and sure enough, the sons of Ammon are delivered over to Jephthah. But when Jephthah goes home, the first thing that comes out of his house is his daughter. And it's not just his daughter, but his only child. And he just tears his clothes, and his heart is just broken. And he goes and he tells his daughter exactly what happened. And she says, you know, let me go and mourn for a couple of months. But then when I come back, you can fulfill your vow, and that takes place. And your heart just breaks when you read that story. But our hearts should not just only break when we read this story, but our hearts should also be warned when we read this story. We should be warned not to make rash vows with the Lord, not to speak impulsively. In those times when we feel like we would do anything for God to answer the prayer, we can be very vulnerable to saying things, making promises that we can't keep, or making promises that would be very difficult to keep. In Numbers chapter 30 and verse 2, it says, if a man makes a vow to the Lord or takes an oath to bind himself with a binding obligation, he shall not violate his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. So if you make a vow to the Lord, saying you had better keep it. You better keep it. Deuteronomy chapter 23 says in verse 21, says, when you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay to pay it, for it would be a sin in you, and the Lord your God will surely require it of you. It says, if you made a vow to the Lord, not only repay it, but you better repay it very quickly, because if you don't, it will be required of you from the Lord. Once again, God taking very seriously the vows that we make with Him. The ecclesiastical writer would take it a step further, and Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verse 5, when he says this, he says, let's start in verse 4. It says, when you make a vow to God, do not be late in paying it, for He takes no delight in fools. Pay what you vow. And then this is the part we want to focus on, verse 5. It is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not pay. So he's basically saying it'd be better not to vow than to vow and then not to follow through. And that could be a temptation, you know. We get our prayers answered, we feel like the situation's settled, and then we go about our business and completely forget the promise that we make to God. Or maybe if it was a difficult promise, we just conveniently forget about it because we don't want to pay the cost of keeping that promise. But the ecclesiastical writer says, hey, it's better not to vow at all than to not keep what you vow. James would go a step further in James chapter 5 and verse 12, when he wrote, but above all, my brethren, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or with any other oath, but your yes is to be yes and your no, no, so that you may not fall under judgment. The Jewish people at this time had a lot of rules in connection to swearing, making promises, making oaths, vows. If you remember, Jesus in Matthew chapter 23 was criticizing the scribes and the Pharisees for their rules about keeping vows. Matter of fact, they would say, just turn there real quick. They would say, or Jesus said, "Woe to you, blind guides, who say, whoever swears by the temple, that is nothing, but whoever swears by the gold of the temple, that is obligated." So they had all these rules. Well, if you said this particular phrase, you didn't have to keep what you said, but if you didn't say that, or if you said this other phrase, then you did have to keep it. And it was just became a really big joke. It's kind of like us saying, "Well, I had my fingers crossed when I said it." Basically what they were doing. But God is very serious. If you vow something, if you make an oath, you better keep it. And so it ought to make us step back and think twice before we step over that line and tell the Lord, "Hey, I will do this if you answer my prayer." But before we close the devotion today, there is one more point I want to make about this story, and that is about the obedience of the daughter. I really feel that because of, we look at it from Jephthah's standpoint, and it is such a heartbreaking situation that Jephthah typically gets all the attention in this story. But what I don't want us to overlook is the wonderful, beautiful story that we have in connection to his daughter. To think about, she's probably, if she's still a virgin, she is very likely that she is still a teenager. And teenagers can be kind of unruly sometimes and not want to listen to their parents. But here you have one that was obedient to her father even to the point of death. Think about that. Put yourself in her situation. Somebody else, in her case her father, made this rash vow. And because they made a rash vow, you're supposed to lose your life? You're supposed to die because of that? It'd be very easy for the daughter to say, "You know what, let me go mourn for 2 months, don't wait for me if you don't see me come back." But no, she did go and mourn, but then she did come back, and she submitted herself to allow her father to be able to keep his vow. What a wonderful, wonderful story. And if anyone's teaching junior high or high school Bible classes, this would be a great teaching tool for kids of that age to just say, here's a girl who was obedient to her father even to the point of death. A very, very beautiful story. And so with that, we'll close out. I thank you guys for watching the video. I hope you guys have a great day. Love you guys. God bless.